The Zirax Dominion had ruled the galaxy for centuries. Their warriors were known as the deadliest hunters, their fleets unmatched, their empire unstoppable. They had crushed countless civilizations, turning thriving worlds into lifeless husks. To them, war was not just survival, it was their way of life. That was why, when a scouting vessel reported the discovery of a new species in an uncharted sector, the Zirax High Command barely paid attention. Humans, the scout reported, his voice filled with uncertainty. They are strange. The War Council laughed. Strange. What did that mean? The Zirax did not fear strange. They only feared things that could fight back, and no new species had ever been a match for them. Are they warriors? One general asked. No, the scout hesitated. They don't seem like it. That was all the High Command needed to hear. If they weren't warriors, then they were nothing. The order was given. Send a warship, burn their colony, and show them what it means to face the Zirax. The Bloodfang, a fast attack vessel, was chosen for the task. It carried 100 of the finest Zirax warriors. Brutal, experienced, merciless. The fleet commander, Drazel, expected the mission to be easy. Find the humans, crush their defenses, and leave nothing alive. As the Bloodfang jumped into hyperspace, none of them knew they were heading into something far worse than war. They were heading into fear itself. The ship exited hyperspace, entering orbit over Arden 7, a small human colony. Drazel studied the planet below, expecting defensive turrets, warships, or at least some sign of resistance. Instead, there was nothing. The human city was silent. No movement, no transmissions, no distress signals. Where are they? One warrior muttered. Drazel growled. They must be hiding. Land the ship. Find them. The Bloodfang descended, its engines roaring as it touched the barren surface. The Zirax warriors marched out in perfect formation, weapons ready. The streets were empty. Buildings stood abandoned. The wind carried a strange, whispering sound that none of them could explain. One of the warriors stepped on something soft. He looked down. A boot, a human boot, still filled with a severed foot. A nervous chuckle passed through the soldiers. Maybe the colony was attacked by another species. Impossible, Drazel snapped. There was no battle, no damage, no blood. But then, why were the humans gone? Drazel gave the order. Search every building. Find them. The squad split up, moving through the streets, kicking open doors. Nothing. Houses were untouched, meals still on tables, drinks half finished. It was as if the humans had simply disappeared. Then came the first scream. A sharp, blood-curdling shriek through the comms. Commander, they, static. Report. Who was that? Report. No response. Another scream. Another voice cut off. Drazel's heart pounded. This wasn't possible. He switched to his warriors' biomonitors. 6 life signals had vanished. No gunfire, no struggle, just gone. Then a whisper. Not over the comms, not from any warrior, but all around them. You should not have come. Drazel spun around, his soldiers backing into a defensive formation. The wind picked up. Shadows stretched unnaturally long against the buildings. One of the warriors aimed his rifle at a dark alleyway. Something moved. The soldier fired. The plasma bolt vanished into the darkness. Then, the darkness moved toward him. A hand, human, shot out of the shadows, grabbed the warrior's helmet, and yanked him into the alley. No scream, no struggle, just silence. Drazel's instincts screamed at him to retreat. This was wrong. This was all wrong. Humans weren't warriors. They weren't even supposed to be here. So why did it feel like the Zirax were the ones being hunted? His claws clenched. No, they were Zirax. They did not fear. Form up. Fire at will. The warriors unleashed hell, plasma rounds burning through every shadow, tearing through walls. Buildings collapsed. Streets melted. But nothing screamed. Nothing ran. Nothing fought back. And yet, the whispers only grew louder. You should not have come. One by one, the warriors vanished, taken, pulled into the dark. No gunfire. No warnings. Just silence. Until only Drazul was left. He turned, trying to run back to the ship, but his feet wouldn't move. A presence stood behind him. He could feel it breathing. Slowly, shaking, he turned his head. A human stood there, smiling. Drazul screamed. The Bloodfang never returned. A single escape pod was found drifting in space weeks later. Inside, curled in a ball, rocking back and forth, was Drazul. His eyes were wild. His claws gripped his skull. His voice whispered the same thing over and over. They are not prey. They are the nightmare. The Zirak's high command listened in horrified silence. For the first time in their empire's history, they felt something they had never known before. Fear. The Zirak's high command sat in silence as they watched the footage from the recovered escape pod. Drazul, once a fearless warrior, now muttered to himself in a trance-like state. His claws dug into his own skin, his eyes darting around as if he could still see something lurking in the shadows. The War Council had never seen one of their own like this. He had survived battles against the strongest species in the galaxy, yet here he was, broken beyond recognition. One of the generals leaned forward, his mandibles clicking in agitation. What did this to him? A scientist hesitated before responding. The readings indicate he suffered from extreme psychological distress. Something terrified him beyond reason. Another general scoffed. Nonsense. He is weak. We should erase him from our records and send another fleet to that colony. The supreme warlord of the Ziraks, Vorkal, narrowed his eyes. You want to send more of our warriors into the unknown. The Bloodfang was a vessel of elite hunters, and yet not a single one returned, except for this broken husk. Do you wish to waste more soldiers? Silence fell over the council. Even the most arrogant among them could not ignore the truth. Something on Arden 7 had destroyed their warriors, not with weapons, but with fear itself. Vorkal rose from his throne. We will not act in ignorance. We must understand our enemy before we strike. A new plan was formed. This time, they would not send warriors. They would send an observer, a highly skilled infiltrator to gather intelligence. He would go alone, hidden, to study the humans and return with answers. The chosen infiltrator was called Varik, a shadow among shadows, known for slipping past even the most advanced security systems. If anyone could uncover the truth, it was him. Varik accepted the mission without hesitation. Unlike the arrogant warriors of the Bloodfang, he did not underestimate the unknown. He spent days reviewing the footage from the escape pod, analyzing every detail. Drazul had spoken of whispers, of moving shadows, of something taking his soldiers one by one. But nothing concrete had been recorded. No physical threats, no battle, no bodies. Just the empty streets and the maddening silence. Varik's ship approached Arden 7 cautiously. He activated the stealth systems, ensuring he would remain invisible to any human technology. As he descended, he saw the colony beneath him, untouched, unchanged, as if frozen in time. The buildings still stood, undamaged. The streets remained eerily clean. It was as if the people had simply vanished. He landed in a remote area, far from where the Bloodfang had disappeared. The air was thick with tension, an unnatural stillness that made even his highly trained senses uneasy. He moved carefully, his advanced sensors scanning for any sign of life. Nothing. Not a single heat signature, not even the smallest movement. As he walked through the colony, he noticed the little things. The way doors were left slightly open, the way chairs were overturned, but there were no signs of a struggle. The way half-eaten meals sat on tables, untouched for what seemed like days. It was as if the humans had simply been erased from existence. Then he heard it. A whisper. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once. It wasn't spoken in any language he knew, yet he understood it. You should not have come. Varek's pulse quickened. He had expected this. He had prepared for it. He activated his cloaking device and moved deeper into the colony. His mission was simple: find evidence of what had happened, retrieve any human technology that could explain the disappearances, and leave undetected. But the deeper he went, the stronger the whispers became. More voices joined in, overlapping, surrounding him. He adjusted his auditory filters, trying to shut them out, but they only grew louder. Then he saw movement. A figure just at the edge of his vision. He spun, his weapon ready, but there was nothing. Then another shape flickered in the distance, a shadow that moved against the light, stretching unnaturally across the walls. He fired a silent shot, his plasma bolt striking the spot where the shadow had been. Nothing. But now, the whispering had stopped. The silence was worse. His instincts screamed at him to leave, but he had a mission to complete. He pressed forward, entering what looked like a central control room. If there was any data left behind, this was where he would find it. He accessed the terminal, his hacking tools bypassing the human security systems with ease. Files appeared on the screen, reports from the last days of the colony. He scanned them quickly. Unusual sightings, strange voices, people going missing one by one. Then, a final report. A single sentence typed in a hurry. They are not what we thought they were. Varek frowned. Before he could analyze further, his sensors picked up something. Movement behind him. He turned slowly. A human stood there, watching him. Varek raised his weapon. Identify yourself. The human smiled. Varek's vision blurred. His body felt wrong. His limbs heavy. His mind foggy. Then the whisper returned, louder than ever. You should not have come. Darkness swallowed him. Varek's consciousness flickered in and out. His mind swam in a sea of whispers, distant, and yet inside him. Words that made no sense yet felt like commands. He tried to move, but his body refused. His limbs felt heavy, his muscles sluggish. He was trained to resist mental interference, but this was different. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't something forcing its way into his mind. It was something waiting. His senses returned in sharp waves. He was lying on a cold metal floor. His advanced combat suit should have been feeding him information, but his HUD was filled with static. His neural interface, his backup communications, all offline. The last thing he remembered was the human standing before him, smiling in that strange way. Not a look of malice nor amusement. It was something far worse. Understanding. He pushed himself up, forcing his body to obey. The room was dim, the only light coming from a broken console that flickered weakly. The control room was no longer empty. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, but there was no clear source of light. He reached for his weapon. Gone. His sidearm. Gone. Even his emergency blade was missing. A deep, unsettling silence filled the air. It was not the silence of emptiness, but of something watching. Varek activated his thermal vision. No heat signatures. No movement. No sign of the human he had seen. Then he heard it. Soft footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Not the erratic steps of a creature hunting. Not the cautious approach of a predator. It was the sound of something walking, as if it had all the time in the world. He turned, scanning every inch of the room. Nothing. His advanced vision modes detected no anomalies, no distortions. And yet, the footsteps continued, circling him, just beyond his sight. He forced his breathing to slow. Panic was the weapon of the hunted. He was not prey. He was Zirax, a shadow among shadows, a ghost. A whisper crawled through the air, brushing against his ears like a breath. You shouldn't have come. Varek didn't flinch. Fear was for the weak. But deep inside, something primal stirred. This was not an enemy he could see. This was not a battle he could fight with weapons. A chill crept up his spine. He needed to move. His mission was simple: gather information, report back, survive. Extraction was impossible without his communication link, but there had to be a way to escape this place. He reached for his wrist, activating a hidden tool built into his suit. A silent pulse rippled through the room, scanning for any signs of technology, energy signatures, or life. The results came back instantly. One life form detected. Human. Right behind him. He spun, claws ready. Nothing. But the whispering had stopped. The air felt heavier, pressing against him like an invisible force. It was then that he noticed something different about the room. The walls. They had changed. They were no longer smooth metal. They pulsed. The realization sent a cold dread through his core. The structure wasn't dead. It was alive. A trap. Something was keeping him here. He had studied humanity before this mission. They were dangerous, yes, but they followed patterns. They had rules. They fought wars with strategy, with weapons. But this was something else. His mind raced through the possibilities. A hallucination. A psychological weapon. No, his training allowed him to recognize illusions, but this was real. This was something far worse than deception. The walls pulsed again, and the whispers returned. Not words. Laughter. Soft at first, then growing. It wasn't coming from one source. It was everywhere. He moved. Fast. His body ached. His vision blurred, but he forced himself forward. Every step felt like he was pushing through thick air, as if something resisted his movement. The doorway he had entered through was gone, replaced by the shifting, breathing walls. No way out. He had to find another path. He pressed forward, deeper into the unknown, the laughter following him, growing louder. He forced himself to focus, his sharp eyes scanning for any structural weaknesses. There, a ventilation shaft, partially concealed behind a console. He moved fast, tearing the grate free and crawling inside. The walls of the vent were cold, too cold. His body temperature sensors flickered erratically. One moment it felt like ice, the next like searing heat. He pushed forward. The whispers continued, but they were growing distant. Then, a sound behind him. A scraping. Something was following him. Varric didn't hesitate. He moved faster, his claws gripping the metal, pushing forward with all the strength in his body. The shaft twisted and turned, narrowing in ways that should not have been possible. The structure was changing around him, trying to keep him inside. No, he would not be trapped. Light. A faint glow ahead. An opening. He lunged forward, breaking free, tumbling onto a metallic surface. He had exited into another corridor, this one different. It was older. Rusted. This was not part of the colony's main structure. He was somewhere deeper now. The whisper returned. Close. Right in his ear. We were waiting for you. Varric turned and saw them. Not just one. Dozens. Humans, standing in the darkness, watching and smiling. Varric's body tensed. His instincts screamed at him to run, to fight, to do something, but his body refused to move. His advanced combat training, his years of experience in battle, none of it prepared him for this. The humans stood before him in the dimly lit corridor, their faces partially hidden in the shadows. They weren't attacking. They weren't even armed. They were just watching. Silent. Still. Smiling. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark, reflecting the flickering emergency lights above. Something was wrong with them. They didn't breathe heavily. They didn't blink. They just stood there, waiting. Varric took a slow step back. The corridor stretched behind him, leading deeper into the station's unknown depths. He didn't want to go deeper. He needed to escape. He needed to find a way out of this nightmare. A whisper crawled through the air. Not from one of the humans. from everywhere. There's nowhere to run. Varric's heart pounded in his chest. His neural interface was still down. His suit's systems were still malfunctioning. He was alone, cut off from his squad, stranded in the heart of something he didn't understand. His mind raced through the possibilities. Were these humans infected? Controlled? Was this some kind of advanced psychological warfare? No, this was something different, something older. He forced his voice to remain steady. Identify yourselves. The humans didn't respond. They just kept smiling. A chill ran down Varric's spine. There was no fear in their eyes, no hostility. But that was what made it worse. They weren't acting like warriors. They weren't acting like prey. They were acting like predators. One of them took a step forward, a single, deliberate step. The lights flickered, and suddenly, they were closer. Varric didn't even see them move. One moment, they were at a distance. The next, they were standing only a few feet away. His claws flexed instinctively. His breathing quickened. This wasn't possible. Even the fastest hunters in the Zirax Empire couldn't move like that. His body demanded action. If he hesitated, he would die. His muscles tensed, and then the lights died. Pitch black. Total silence. Not even the sound of his own breathing. Just darkness. And then, a whisper, right beside his ear. You don't belong here. Varric swung his arm, his claws slashing through the air. But there was nothing. The lights flickered back on. The humans were gone. The corridor was empty. His heart pounded like war drums. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. His body trembled, but not from fear. His battle instincts were still in overdrive, scanning for movement, for any sign of where they went. He activated his thermal vision again. Still nothing. They had just vanished. Varric took a step forward, cautiously moving through the corridor, every sense on high alert. His claws twitched, ready to strike. His mind struggled to make sense of what just happened. Were they illusions, holograms, some kind of advanced stealth technology? No, he had felt their presence. He had heard them. They were real. He reached a junction, the station's design stretching in multiple directions. His instincts screamed at him to take the path leading upward, to the surface, to safety. But a strange force pulled at his mind, a whisper at the edges of his thoughts. A cold realization settled in his chest. This was a trap, and he had walked right into it. The humans weren't fleeing from him. They were hurting him. Every door that locked behind him, every malfunction in his suit, every dead end, it was all leading him here. Why? What did they want? He didn't get the chance to answer, because the whispers returned. But this time, they were inside his head. You came to hunt, but you never asked what was hunting you. The walls groaned, shifting. The air grew heavier, and the laughter returned. Not human, not alien. Something else. Something waiting. Something hungry. Varric realized, too late. He was never meant to leave this place alive. Varric's mind was screaming, but he couldn't make a sound. The whispers weren't just in his head anymore. They were around him, inside the walls, beneath the floor, slipping into every crack of his thoughts like smoke. His training told him to move, to fight. But how could he fight something he couldn't see? Something that wasn't there. He forced himself to step forward, scanning every shadow, every flickering light. His neural interface was still down. His weapon systems refused to respond. His claws were his only defense. But against what? The silence was worse than the whispers. It stretched, pressing down on him like a living thing. The corridor had twisted into darkness, but he knew there was no turning back. He had come too far. The station wouldn't let him leave anymore. The moment he had stepped into this place, he had become prey. Something was guiding him forward, something unseen but undeniable. The station was vast, an ancient derelict drifting in the void, yet it felt alive, like it was watching him. breathing. The temperature dropped. Frost formed along the metal walls, his breath turning to mist. The gravity fluctuated for a moment, and his stomach lurched as if the station itself had exhaled. And then, footsteps. Soft, barely a whisper. Not his own. His claws flexed. His eyes darted to the sides, but there was nothing. Just the vast emptiness of the station stretching endlessly around him. Another step. Closer this time. Then another. And another. But there was no one there. No thing. Just the sound of something unseen approaching. Varric spun, his instincts screaming at him. And for a brief second, he saw. A shadow. Not just a trick of the light. Something real. Something that moved when he moved. Something watching him back. And then, gone. His breathing quickened. His heart pounded like a war drum, every instinct in his body telling him to run, to fight, to do something before it was too late. But it was already too late. The lights above him flickered. And in that brief moment of darkness, something touched him. Not an attack. Not a strike. Just a single, slow, deliberate touch against the back of his neck. Cold. Wrong. The lights flickered back on, and Varric lunged, his claws slicing through empty air. His body spun, his senses sharp, but there was nothing. No attacker. No shadow. Just silence. His breathing was ragged now, his claws shaking despite himself. This wasn't a battle. This wasn't a hunt. This was something else, something worse. He had faced monsters before. He had fought nightmares on alien battlefields. But this wasn't a fight. This was something playing with him. Something that didn't just want to kill him. Something that wanted to break him. Varric forced himself to move. If he stayed still, he was dead. The corridor ahead led into a larger chamber, his only option. He sprinted forward, his claws clicking against the frozen metal floor. The air around him grew heavier, the whispers fading into a deep, low hum that vibrated in his bones. The room was massive, filled with ancient machinery, the remains of something once powerful now long forgotten. Strange markings covered the walls, alien symbols that pulsed faintly, as if alive. And in the center of the room, a figure, a human, or at least, it looked like one. Its back was turned to him, its body unnaturally still. Not breathing, not moving, just standing there. Varric stopped, his claws ready. His instincts screamed at him to retreat, but there was no retreat anymore. The human shifted, a slow, unnatural motion, like something was inside its skin, wearing it like a suit. It turned and smiled. Not a normal smile. A wrong smile. Too wide, too perfect. And its eyes. They weren't human anymore. They were something else. Something deep. Something endless. Something hungry. Varric stepped back, his muscles tensed for a fight. The thing wearing the human skin took a step forward. Slow. Deliberate. Varric prepared to strike. And then the lights died. Total blackness. The hum became a roar, vibrating through his skull, drowning out his thoughts. And then, a whisper impossibly close. We were never human. Pain exploded through Varric's mind, and the darkness swallowed him whole. Varric's mind shattered into fragments of pain and confusion. The darkness was absolute, thick, and suffocating, like he had been swallowed by something alive. His body refused to move, every muscle frozen, locked in a moment of paralyzed terror. He couldn't see. He couldn't hear. He couldn't even tell if he was breathing. Had he died? No, because the pain was still there, deep in his skull, like something had reached inside and touched his thoughts. A pressure, an unbearable weight, squeezing his mind like a predator toying with its prey before the final kill. He struggled to focus, to grasp at something, anything that could anchor him back to reality. Then he heard it, a voice, not in his ears, in his mind. We were never human. The whisper curled through his thoughts, sliding past his defenses, wrapping around his very sense of self. He wanted to resist. He wanted to fight. But how did you fight something inside your mind? Light. Sudden and blinding. His vision returned in a violent flash, his body convulsing as sensation rushed back all at once. His claws scraped against the cold metal floor, his chest heaving as he gasped for breath. He was still in the chamber. The strange alien markings on the walls pulsed, glowing faintly in the dim light. Machinery hummed with a rhythmic beat, as if the station itself had woken up. And then there was the figure. Still there. Still smiling. But closer now. Varric scrambled backward, every instinct in his body screaming at him to run. But his legs wouldn't obey. The thing took another step forward. Slow, deliberate. Its movements were almost wrong. Too smooth, too unnatural, like something imitating a living being but not fully understanding how. Varric forced his body to move. His claws dug into the metal floor, his breath ragged as he pushed himself up. The thing in front of him tilted its head, watching, studying. And then, it spoke. Your kind are not the first to come here. The voice was layered. Not one voice, but many, overlapping in a chorus of distorted echoes. But you are the first to understand fear. Varric's heart pounded. His species knew fear. Every intelligent species did. But this was something else. Something ancient. Something that existed before fear had a name. He took a step back, his claws trembling. What are you? The figure's smile widened. You are not ready for that answer. Varric's vision blurred for a moment, his head throbbing as if something was pressing against his thoughts, probing, peeling back the layers of his mind, like it was dissecting his very essence. Memories flashed. Battles. Victories. Defeats. The day he had earned his warrior's mark. The first time he had seen a human. The first time he had feared one. The figure laughed, a hollow, unnatural sound that wasn't truly laughter at all. Ah, now you understand. Varric's claws flexed. He couldn't let this thing inside his head. He couldn't let it win. He had to move. He had to fight. His legs obeyed. He lunged, a strike aimed directly at the thing's throat. And his claws passed through it, like it wasn't real. The thing watched him, unfazed. It raised a hand, fingers shifting, stretching, becoming something wrong. And then it reached for him. Varric staggered back, but it was too late. The fingers brushed against his forehead, and pain, searing, endless. His mind unraveled. Reality twisted. He was no longer in the station. He was somewhere else. A battlefield, but not one he recognized. Not a world he had ever seen before. The ground was cracked, scorched, soaked in something dark and unnatural. The sky burned with violent red storms, the air filled with an endless howling scream. Figures moved in the distance, things that weren't supposed to exist, shapes that defied reason. They moved like shadows, shifting between forms, slipping in and out of reality. And in the center of it all, a human, alone, standing in the chaos, unshaken. A soldier, his armor scratched, his weapon bloodied, surrounded by nightmares, yet not afraid, not running, not screaming, just watching them back. And then, as Varric's mind shattered further, he realized something even worse. The nightmares. They weren't attacking the human. They were hesitating. They were afraid. Of him. The human raised his weapon. His face was calm. And then he spoke, his voice cutting through the chaos, steady and unwavering. Run. And the nightmares did. Varric's mind snapped back. He collapsed to the floor of the station, gasping, shaking. The figure was still there, still smiling, but now, amused. Now you see. Varric's claws clenched. His heart pounded. He was afraid. But for the first time in his life, he understood something far, far worse. The greatest terror in the galaxy wasn't this thing. It wasn't the shadows or the whispers. It wasn't even the monsters he had just seen. It was the thing the monsters feared most. It was humanity. Varric's body was still trembling, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The chamber around him seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, as if the very walls had been watching his torment and were now waiting to see what he would do next. The figure in front of him had not moved. It stood there, watching, smiling, studying him like a scientist observes a caged animal. Varric forced himself to rise, his claws digging into the cold metal floor as he steadied his stance. The vision still burned in his mind. The battlefield, the howling creatures, the human standing alone in the chaos, while the horrors of the void feared him. It was impossible. It was unnatural. "Now you understand," the figure said again, its voice curling around his thoughts. "Now you see why the galaxy will never be the same." Varric swallowed hard. He had fought countless wars, had stared death in the face more times than he could count. But this was something else. This was not war. This was annihilation. And the worst part, the humans hadn't even tried yet. A new, terrifying realization crept into his mind. The races of the galaxy had always believed that humans were dangerous because of their resilience, their adaptability, their refusal to surrender. But those were just surface traits. Those were only the symptoms of something deeper. The true horror of humanity was something far worse, something the galaxy had never faced before. It was their will, an unbreakable force that could turn them into something beyond mere warriors, beyond soldiers, beyond monsters. They became legends. They became the thing that even nightmares feared. The figure took a step forward, and for the first time, Varric noticed something horrifying. Its form was shifting. It was still human-shaped, but its features twisted, flickering between faces, between identities. For a moment, it wasn't a single being. It was many. A soldier from the past. A warrior from a forgotten war. A survivor who had lost everything but refused to fall. A nameless, faceless force that had been forged by fire, battle, and suffering. "We do not conquer," the voices whispered. "We do not destroy. But when something threatens us..." The room darkened. The air froze. The figure's eyes locked onto Varric's. "We end it." The words slammed into him like a physical force. His mind reeled, and for the first time in his life, Varric felt something deeper than fear. He felt helpless. This wasn't just about humanity. This wasn't just about a species that had survived death whirls and endless wars. This was about something more ancient, something primal. The thing that had made humans unstoppable wasn't their weapons or their numbers. It wasn't their technology or their intelligence. It was the sheer, unrelenting, unyielding refusal to lose. And that was something the galaxy had never encountered before. "The others won't believe you," the figure said, reading his thoughts as if they were open pages in a book. "They will mock you. They will laugh. And then they will make the same mistake you did." Varric's throat felt dry. He could already see it, the high-ranking officials of his empire dismissing his warnings, calling him paranoid, claiming that the humans were just another species to be managed, to be controlled. They would never understand, not until it was too late. The figure stepped back into the shadows, its form flickering, dissolving into the darkness. Its final words echoed through the chamber, a whisper that carried more weight than an entire fleet of warships. "We do not seek war." The last of the shadows swallowed it whole, and Varric was alone again. The lights in the chamber flickered, the strange symbols on the walls dimming as if the station itself had exhaled. The crushing pressure in his skull lifted, and suddenly it felt like he could think again. But the fear remained. Varric forced himself to move, stumbling toward the exit. His claws scraped against the floor, his breathing ragged as he ran. The moment he stepped through the doors, his communicator crackled to life, filled with frantic voices from his crew. "Commander, are you there? We lost contact for almost an hour." An hour. It had felt like only minutes. He didn't answer them. He couldn't. His mind was still racing, still trying to process the terrifying truth he had just learned. The doors to his ship loomed ahead, and as he stepped inside, he felt the weight of 1,000 decisions pressing down on him. Should he warn the others? Should he run? Or was it already too late? As the ship's engines roared to life and the station shrank in the distance, Varric turned his gaze toward the distant stars, toward the small blue planet that had changed everything. Fear had a new name in the galaxy, and it was humanity.